Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and board game aficionado. Welcome to RogueWatson Reviews, my video review series where I take a look at tabletop games. These videos are divided into three parts. First, I'll introduce the game, take a look at the components, and briefly explain how it plays. Second, I'll run through a sample turn or round of the game. And finally, I'll list my pros and cons and provide my final thoughts. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, and Adam. Thank you all very much for your support. With this video, we're going to be taking a look at One Deck Dungeon. One Deck Dungeon is a roguelike dungeon crawler for 1 to 2 players that uses a clever combination of cards and dice to simulate a classic excursion through a monster-infested dungeon. You'll select a typical fantasy class, open doors, roll dice, defeat monsters, and acquire loot, all within a very tiny box. One Deck Dungeon was designed by Chris Cheslick and published by Asmadi Games in 2016. Let's take a look at what's inside the box. Alright, let's take a look at what's inside the box for One Deck Dungeon. Take a look at the components. The game mostly consists of cards and dice. You've got a campaign manual, which I will go over that in a moment. We have 5 character classes that you can choose from: the Paladin, the Rogue, the Warrior, the Mage, and the Archer. Typical fantasy classes, although one thing may surprise you, they're all women, which pretty much never happens in any game ever, which is nice to see, I think. Nicely colored dice. The dice are tied to strength, dexterity, and magic, as well as a black dice called the heroic dice, which acts as a wild. It counters for hearts and potions, and finally you've got the cards. This is what the encounter deck looks like. Cards can represent multiple things, but more importantly, they represent monsters and traps within the dungeon. At the top is the amount of experience this monster is worth. At the bottom is a possible skill. On the left side is loot. And in the middle is the encounter itself. I love the way the cards can represent all those different aspects on a single card. I'll go over the gameplay later on, but there are only 2 different kinds of cards. There are monsters and there are traps. They have different boxes that represent the different dice you have to roll, and then the number you have to hit. And then certain boxes represent how you have to manipulate them. So shields always have to be filled in first. Time represents time spent in the dungeon, and hearts represents the damage done. We'll go over that later in a bit. The only other cards are the actual boss cards, which are 2-sided. You've got the actual layer on here, which adds additional boxes for each level of the dungeon that you go down, and then you fight a boss at the end, which has much higher stats than a normal encounter. Finally, you've got your level cards, which tell you exactly what you're capped at for items and skills, as well as potions and any encounter bonuses, and the experience required at each level, for a total of 4 levels. That's pretty much all that's in the box. Now let's go over a sample turn of how to play One Deck Dungeon. Alright, so here I've set up a sample game for 1 player. And again, One Deck Dungeon is a fantastic solo game. First, you choose a boss layer, a boss to go after. I chose the Dragon's Cave. Bosses do come in easy, medium, or hard variety. There's a nice turn reference that tells you exactly what you have to do to play. Choose a character. I've chosen the Archer, pretty balanced character there. And you begin the game at level 1. You have to burn 2 time before you can open your first. You go down the hallway and see your first 4 doors, and you burn additional time whenever you open a door. Burning time means you literally take cards and put them in the discard pile. Now that's a bad thing because that means you burn through the level faster and you reach the end of the level, possibly before you want to, because you want to try to get as strong as possible before you get deeper into the dungeon because things get more powerful. So at the opening, I've discarded my 2 cards. You always burn 2 time. And then I will open a door. So I'll need to burn 2 more time. and then I can open a door. It's a Wraith. This is a level 3 experience monster, which is generally considered right in the middle. It does have an effect before the encounter. I have to convert one item to XP. I don't have any items. This is the first round of the game, so that's not too bad. And you can see that it does require a large amount of blue dice to try to take this thing down, which may prove tricky for me. The opening rounds of the game can prove very, very difficult, which is a con that I'm going to have at the end of this video. Because cards don't really scale easier, they do get more challenging, because as level 1 in the Dragon's Cave, you do have to add either this side to combat encounters or this side to trap encounters. So this is a combat encounter, which means I have to fill all these boxes, or at least as many as I can, plus this box. I also forgot one of the rules. For the Dragon's Cave, you have to spend an extra 5 time before your first turn on each floor, which means the Dragon's Cave, you just go through that much more time, which is a bummer. So I can choose now to either enter the room and have the encounter, or I can flee. If I flee, I just don't have to do the encounter, and I simply burn 2 time and open another door. It's not terribly efficient. You want to be able to take out the encounters if you can, but that option is there in case you end up with something really hard that has boxes that maybe you're not inclined to. For example, the mage does not have a lot of swords and has a lot of magic, so you end up with somebody with a lot of swords. You might need to back off until you get some better equipment to deal with that. So we roll our dice, and literally you roll the number of dice equal to the number of icons you have here for your items. So the archer has 2 yellow swords, 3 pink boots, 2 magic spells. So those are my dice, and now we roll. What did we get? Okay, 4 and 5 is pretty good for blue, because that means we can fill up the shield. Now, shields have to be filled up before anything else. If you can't fill up the shield, you can't fill up any boxes, and I literally like to place them right there on top. Now, big boxes can be filled with multiple dice. However, single square boxes can only be filled with 1 dice. And unfortunately, this requires a lot of yellow dice. I rolled a 1 and a 4, which is really, really bad. So I wouldn't be able to fill up any of those that shield. And if I can't fill up that shield, I can't fill up any of the rest. My pink dice are useless. This was a really bad encounter for the archer. So the nice thing here is that the Wraith is still considered defeated in terms of I get the loot. However, I have to suffer all of these consequences. So I would suffer 3 time, because there's 3 time icons, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 hearts, which almost kills her. That's really, really bad. That's a really bad first encounter, and I did not roll very well either. So I would put 4 hearts right here, and then suffer 3 time. Before I rolled, I could have chosen to use her heroic feat, which is I could spend 2 time to roll 2 heroic dice, which are the black wild dice, essentially. Or spend 4 time to roll 3 dice, and then I can discard one of the dice rolled. That gives you an extra dice, which is nice. Also, you want to try to level them up to level 2 as quickly as possible, because at level 2, you get a heroic dice with every single encounter. So this one is considered completed at that point, and now I have an interesting choice. I can either take this item as a loot card, which would give me another yellow dice, or I can take it as a skill, which lets me essentially turn any pink dice into a pink 6, which is very nice, or I can turn it into experience, which is worth 3 experience, and I need 6 to level up. Those are all good options and part of the agonizing trick of how to get better at this game. Let's use it as a skill, which means I tuck it under the card. If I wanted to use it as an item, I would tuck it under the left side and literally just adds on there very nicely. In experience, I would just tuck it to the side right there. So now I have that skill. Skills can be used once per encounter, although it explains if you can use them during combat encounters or during trap encounters, which is that icon. So let's move on from there. I do start with a single potion, which out of combat I can heal for 3 hearts. Let's definitely use that, because holy crap, I'm almost dead after the first round. And then we'll burn 2 more time and open another door. And this is a trap encounter. So there are combat encounters and there are trap encounters. This one we are built very well for, however, because we've got a lot of the pink dice. I can choose to either disarm this bear trap, which I would need 6 pink dice, but it does cost me 3 time even if I succeed. Or I can run through it for 11, which is obviously a lot harder to get. But I do roll 3 dice. Oh, but I can't use my dexterity on a trap. So can I get 3 dice? Now the problem is I still have to follow the rule of the level 1 Dragon's Cave, which means I have to fill up a dice here. So automatically I have to spend one of my dice here. Hopefully it's at least a 2. And then I would have to get an 11 off 2 dice. I don't think I can do that. So I'm going to go for disarming them, which means I have to burn 3 times even before I try. And on traps, you can only roll that kind of colored dice, as well as, of course, your black die. I could use my heroic feat, but I'm going to save it for now because I don't want to burn even more time. And I will roll 3 dice. Oh, goodness. Well, I think we barely got it because we can use this 2 right here, because, again, we have to cover up the shields first. And then we've got barely our 5 and 1 equals the 6, which means we do not have to suffer any of the printed consequences on here. Instead, we complete this one successfully. And the same thing here. I can either choose to add it as a piece of loot, giving me another blue die to roll. I can add it as experience. Or instead of a skill, this one actually offers me another potion that I can drink to gain 3 blue die, which is usually pretty good because that gives you another potion you can use. And that's basically a sample turn. As you go, that was 2 turns. As you go deeper into the dungeon, you will eventually get to the end of this deck, and then the stairs will appear, and you can go down further. As you go down deeper into the dungeon, it adds more boxes that you have to fill to each encounter. These are cumulative until you finally get to the 3rd level. It gets even stronger, and then once you get all the way to the 3rd level, you've been going through the deck 3 times over. And by the way, the deck gets smaller because obviously you're taking these cards that you complete into items and skills. You're also leveling up and gaining more items and skills at a time until you finally face off against the boss. Oh boy, and they are not easy. And that's a sample turn of how to play One Deck Dungeon. One thing I almost forgot to go over is the campaign. You can see this is a campaign in progress that I've got going on. The campaign lets you check off boxes as you complete certain requisites. So for example, completing a floor, leveling up, and defeating a boss gives you check marks, and then you can check all these different things off. And this lets you gain new abilities for future runs, literally like a modern roguelike would, such as Rogue Legacy, which is a really, really great fun feature, so you can keep an ongoing game with the goal of obviously defeating all the bosses in the least amount of games played. And then, of course, you can do it all again with every single hero. That's a lot of games played, and of course, they give you plenty of campaign pages to work with. Really, really fun system that I'm enjoying. Pro, it's the perfect solo game. Many games have solo variants, but One Deck Dungeon is truly built for solo play, though it also scales perfectly fine for a pair of players working together. Pro, the game is small and cheap. You can easily find it for around $20 if not less, and the small box makes it easily portable, though I wouldn't recommend literally pulling it out on an airplane or bus, as it does have tiny pieces and lots of cards you have to keep up with. Pro, campaign mode adds score tracking and progression over multiple games, doling out rewards even if you die before defeating the boss, giving every game a solid sense of accomplishment. Pro, all female characters. This is practically unheard of in the fantasy genre or any genre. It's a pleasant surprise when we reach a 50% ratio for non-male characters, so to have 100% here is delightfully refreshing, and obviously has no impact on the gameplay at all. Con, limited cards. You'll see the same 24 or so monsters and traps over and over again. The 6 boss layers add some variation to each encounter, but the game can get repetitive if you're playing a lot. Con, limited challenge scaling. Cards do get more powerful as you get deeper into the dungeon, but encounters don't scale the other way. Lady Luck can be very cruel if you draw mostly high-powered monsters and threats early on, which could lead to an early demise. I am in love with One Deck Dungeon. I never really had a go-to solo board game. Yes, a lot of board games have solo variants, but very few are satisfying and mostly just make me wish I was playing with friends. But One Deck Dungeon really works as a solo dungeon crawl. It's very easy to set up and plays out like a fantasy-themed version of Sudoku as you try to fill out the right boxes with the dice rolls. There's a nice ramp-up of complexity as you gain more dice and use acquired skills to manipulate them. More often than not, the game ends with either a thrilling victory or a narrow defeat. And on top of all that, the included campaign mode provides the perfect ongoing sense of progression. For a solo game that also scales well for 2-player co-op, I can't recommend One Deck Dungeon enough. Thank you everyone for watching this video review. You can enjoy more videos, reviews, and live plays of board games, video games, and tabletop RPGs here on my YouTube channel, as well as my website at RogueWatson.com. And you can support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Thank you.